All right. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for being here. What you're attending today is a webinar of the Sustainable Communities Division of the American Planning Association. We'll get more into the topic for today's webinar in a few minutes. But first of all, just some background about the division. The Sustainable Communities Division aims to support planners who are working to integrate all aspects of sustainability into our work as planners. And one way that we do that is by coordinating a series of webinars. And though we often partner with the planning webcast series for our webinars, today we're on our own. So thank you again for joining us. I'd like to give a big thank you to our 2016-2017 sponsors. They allow us to do things like put on webinars, but also they help fund us to host events at the national conference and the regional conferences, and they support our sustainability champions and other initiatives. So please let them know you appreciate their support of the division. Here's some contact information for the division. We have a lot going on. We have several ongoing initiatives. You can learn more about those on our website and on our social media. You receive our bi-weekly e-bulletin, which is packed full of good information about news and events. You can do so on the blog listed here. And feel free to send us an email if you have webinar ideas or other ideas, or if you're interested in volunteering. We're starting to plan some really exciting activities for the conference in New York in May. But as I mentioned earlier, we have several other initiatives that are ongoing, so we'd love to have your help. So for today's webinar, our theme is Living Communities. And in this webinar, we will explore the Living Community Challenge, which is a new design framework developed by the International Living Future Institute. The LCC is a certification program as well as a planning and design philosophy that starts by raising the question, what does good look like? We'll also explore an LCC companion tool that arose in part from a research partnership with the San Francisco Planning Department. We're hoping to save some time for Q&A at the end, so please enter any questions that you have into the chat box. They'll come to the presenters and to me, and we'll try to get through some of them at the end of the presentation. If we don't get through all of the questions, we'll go ahead and post some responses on the website, sustainableplanning.net, which is where we'll also put a copy of the presentation document and video. So our speakers today are Alicia Daniels-Uhlig, who is an architect and a passionate green building advocate with 20 years of sustainable design experience. Alicia directs the Living Community Challenge and policy for the Institute and is focused on accelerating the creation of vibrant, healthy, sustainable communities. Scott Edmondson is a strategic sustainability planner, economist at the San Francisco Planning Department. He is also one of the Sustainable Community Division's Sustainability Champions. And I am Jennifer Koch. I am the Secretary-Treasurer for the Sustainable Communities Division. I'm an Associate Planner with Roadside and Harwell in Alexandria, Virginia. So with that, we'll get started. Thanks again for joining us. And we look forward to discussing with you in a little bit.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Jennifer said, my name is Alicia Daniels-Uhlig, and I'm an architect, joined here today by Scott Edmondson, the Strategic Sustainability Planner and Economist for the San Francisco Planning Department. I'll jump into some of our learning objectives here today. Understanding the Living Community Challenge, describe each design performance area, an ability to explore the power of the patterns approach to planning and designing living communities, and discuss how Living Community Challenge and patterns can be used in practice. So the Living Future Institute is working towards a future that is socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. We're implementing this vision of a living future through a variety of programs and initiatives, including the Living Community Challenge. We're probably most known for the Living Building Challenge. Our headquarters are in the world's largest living building, the Bullitt Center, shown here. And our work is rooted in a core set of values and philosophy, driving the market towards change. It's also an advocacy tool, influencing policy updates, typical design and development processes, or even how materials are manufactured. And the Living Community Challenge is a certification program that addresses development at all scales. Incremental refinements to building codes and prescriptive green building systems have generally tried to minimize negative impacts. The Living Community Challenge imagines a world where the built environment regenerates natural, cultural, and social systems, and where sustainability, which is to say not doing harm to these systems, is only the starting point of the conversation. Living communities are regenerative and provide net positive benefits, not just less harm. We believe it's time to imagine a living future. And we believe living communities are part of that. The underlying principle of the Living Community Challenge is that buildings and infrastructure should mimic nature and natural systems. The Living Building Challenge uses the metaphor of the flower to illustrate this principle. For the Living Community Challenge, we use the metaphor of a forest, since it's less about the individual organism or building and more about how the community or ecosystem functions as a whole. This means that the community is unique to place given existing site conditions, adapted to its climate, harvests all of its own energy and water. Waste is treated as a resource. Symbiotic, all the systems coexist harmoniously. It's not designed in siloed specialties. It's diverse and it's beautiful. The Living Community Challenge, sometimes we call it the LCC, suggests new models for planning. Over the last century or so, planning has, as a discipline, has become siloed and fragmented. And the environment is really under the control of a variety of entities that aren't often tasked with or rewarded for cooperation. In order for communities to achieve the Living Community Challenge, this old planning paradigm can no longer stand. Streets can no longer be engineered to maximize the efficiency and safety of one group of users at the expense of all others. They need to become multimodal transportation corridors, some of which might not have any vehicular traffic, and some might be providing other functions, such as urban agriculture. Communities are starting to use the Living Community Challenge as a framework to reinvent our built environment in the pursuit of higher performing, more livable neighborhoods. So to achieve this, let's dive into the challenge. For the Living Community Challenge, we have 7 broad categories that define its areas of focus. We call them petals, again, using the metaphor of nature. Within each of these petals, there's a series of performance requirements called imperatives. Completion of all 20 imperatives is necessary for those seeking full Living Community Challenge certification. The Living Community Challenge is helping communities become better by pursuing a restorative vision. The LCC links well with other protocols and frameworks for community engagement, and these tools can be considered to assist for the durability of change to the fullest extent of inclusion that we're looking for. Oh, pardon me. The LCC can be applied to development of almost every single community type, both new, infill master plans, and existing neighborhoods. Be it a small city block or street, a mixed-use residential community, transit-oriented community, or a college campus, as well as community planning efforts such as visioning, climate, comprehensive, and neighborhood planning. This list represents a number of possible applications for the Living Community Challenge. We're often asked, how does the Living Community Challenge, since it was launched in 2014, differ from the Living Building Challenge? The Living Community Challenge was developed from the Living Building Challenge. scale projects, buildings, infrastructure, the public realm. The structure of the two standards is quite similar, but the methods for achieving certification will be different. The basic Living Community Challenge criteria include a diversity of uses. That's the access to essential components of livability, places to eat and sleep, work, play, where services are provided. You need multiple buildings and at least one multimodal street. Shared infrastructure, energy, and water is optional, but it is a typical indicator of a Living Community Challenge projects. Those communities that don't meet criteria 1 through 3 are encouraged to use the Living Building Challenge standard. So this diagram here helps explore the difference between the Living Building Challenge and the Living Community Challenge, a little bit more detailed. Imagine a municipality that's planning in a specific neighborhood represented by this dashed boundary. To begin, the community team must differentiate between what is owned by the LCC applicant, we call that the community-owned development, and what is not owned by the LCC applicant. In this case, the municipality that has registered the neighborhood owns and develops streets, the city hall, city park, and a variety of other community buildings, all the areas that are marked in gray and labeled. Now, back to the question. Do all buildings within the living community boundary need to be living buildings? No. Only the sites owned by the community applicant need to meet the Living Building Challenge. Here's a visual of which buildings would need to meet the Living Building Challenge. So on a very basic level, the first step in becoming a living community is registration, which is simply express the community's commitment to pursuing the program. The last step is certification, which is based on 12 months of actual performance. Steps 2 and 3 have intermediate vision plan, master plan, and emerging living community submittal milestones. If you're interested more in the process, I would encourage you to download our handbook, which we'll talk about later. There are 3 different levels of certification. Full Living Community Challenge certification means that the community has achieved all 20 imperatives. Petal certification designates the achievement of at least 3 petals, one of which must be water, energy, or materials, along with limits to growth and inspiration. And net zero energy certification is for projects that achieve the core net positive energy imperative, as well as a handful of others. So let's get into the petals. The place petal focuses on reestablishing balance between nature and human-constructed environment. It promotes land use and building forms that create human rather than mechanical habitat, favoring human-powered transportation and the protection of wild areas. Also highlights an imperative such as number 2, urban agriculture. The Food Roof Farm in St. Louis is a prime example of social, environmental, and economic benefit in the form of a rooftop garden. When a community garden needed to grow, there wasn't space on the ground to scale up, so community members approached the owner of a 2-story building. It took time to find the right building and building owner to allow a rooftop farm. The design and construction was led by community volunteers alongside professionals. The Food Roof Farm is a platform for education and empowering community members to be involved in food systems in their neighborhood and providing healthy foods to those who need it most. Designed and built under several mayors, Chiclarutas is one of the most comprehensive bike path networks in the world. Mayor Enrique Peñalosa maintains a personal commitment to a healthy, car-free city. He once proposed that an urban planner should, and I quote, "make sidewalks as wide as you value your citizens," end quote. The Chiclarutas has a series of overlapping networks that connects Bogota's center to many other parts of the city. Since the development of the network, bicycle use in Bogota has quintupled. There are now more than 400,000 trips made daily by bicycle. A large portion of this use is in lower income areas. And between 2000 and 2007, the network was responsible for reducing carbon emissions by 36.6 thousand tons. Bike-related injuries have been reduced 8.8%, despite a 38% increase in bicycle use. So this brings us to the water petal. Water is a core principle of the Living Community Challenge. And we're looking at water because it's a precious resource. In a typical developed community today, water is treated as a free commodity. Its source, distribution, and removal are unknown generally. The LCC takes a different approach, one that treats water found on site as an asset rather than a problem, and emulates natural closed-loop systems like a forest and incorporates water as a thing of beauty that it should be. So rainwater, gray water, and black water are all part of the one imperative, net positive water, which requires that all three of these be treated without chemicals on site rather than being piped away. The next petal is energy. Simple, and then it has only one imperative, net positive energy, without the use of combustion. While it's simple in one imperative, it actually reflects the deep crisis of the carbonization of the atmosphere and oceans. In the United States, building operations are the largest single user of energy, representing 41% of the nation's total primary energy consumption, the majority of which is from fossil fuels. Those of us in the world of constructing and operating and designing communities play a core role in resolving the climate crisis. Because communities and districts not only include buildings, the space between them, the broader transportation networks, and a scale where it can impact the industry with specifications and purchasing, the Living Community Challenge has the ability to start to reduce energy demand in the industry and transportation sectors as well. This brings us to health and happiness. The Living Building and Living Community Challenge address health and happiness in slightly different ways. The Living Building Challenge addresses occupant health and happiness by providing fresh air, daylight, and views of nature. At the community scale, we address resident health and happiness by promoting social interaction, by providing access to community amenities, and continuing to connect people with nature. The Living Community Challenge seeks to promote both a built environment and a public realm that improves both physical and mental health. The high percentage of hardscape is not only concerning for our stormwater management and the impact of water quality, but it is also an issue for our health. Nature deficit disorder, highlighted in Richard Liv's book, outlines concerns that our children are gradually becoming more disconnected from nature and shows the benefits of connecting our children and our adults to nature in terms of cognitive function and creativity. In a world of limited resources and space, single-purpose infrastructure is a luxury we can no longer afford. Our early living says that systems function best when individual elements do multiple things at once. A park can no longer be just a place to read a book or walk to work, to produce food, and to store and infiltrate water. This slide demonstrates examples of synergistic strategies. We challenge all communities to use this root principle, improvements to their streets, alleys, rooftops, and green spaces. So in this example, like you just to picture a common street. It includes 2 lanes of traffic, a center turn lane, and it's a full street width of 60 feet of impervious pavement dominated by car traffic of the day, especially considering that the average car in America sits vacant 22.8 hours per day. You can see here infrastructure serves a single purpose. Same street, this is actually a before and after. 2 lanes of traffic still exist for freight and micromobility. Safe pedestrian and cycling routes are now integrated in an all rewilding strategy that provides a solution for stormwater, community food options, and recreation. You can learn more about this in our report, which has this rendering and others, Toward a Living Community, a Vision for Seattle's First Hill and Adjacent Neighborhood. The materials petal. Materials selection has broad-reaching impact on design, construction, and occupancy. It deeply influences and is influenced by each of the other petals. We generally use the precautionary principle as the underlying theme of the materials petal. It states that if an action or policy might cause severe harm to the public or to the environment, in the absence of a scientific consensus that harm would not ensue, the burden of proof falls on those who would advocate taking change. In layman's terms, it's the better safe than sorry approach. When projects teams dive into the Living Building Challenge Red List, which is incorporated into these imperatives, they discovered that a seemingly simple list of 22 chemicals to eliminate from building products represents more than 777 chemicals. These are items that we're trying to get out of our built environment. To facilitate the identification of red list-free materials, the Institute has established a transparency-driven ingredients label called Declare. You can check out our webpage. A great example of net positive waste is Hammersmith Sjöstad project, a sustainable urban development project in Stockholm that has a number of innovative ecological working systems. This vacuum waste collection sorts out combustible waste for heating in a cogen plant. The chute transports waste to a central collecting area, and it has saved about 400 tons of carbon from being emitted every year. The equity petal focuses on creating a built environment that upholds the dignity of all members of society, regardless of their physical abilities or economic situations. The imperatives cover a range of issues, including accessibility, rights to natural systems, and protecting individuals from negative impacts caused by adjacent properties. This is the first Woonerf in Delft, Netherlands. It's a great example of a street reclaimed for people. Beauty. Unlike other green building rating systems, the Living Community Challenge recognizes the need for beauty as a core part of life and places we live. Extending the concept of beauty, Living Community Challenge projects are meant to inspire others within a region and community. Part of that inspiration comes from active efforts to educate others about the decision made for the project and its aspirations, motivations, and design. Which brings us to our first Living Community Challenge pattern, show and tell, utilizing life-size pilot projects to demonstrate that a neighborhood's improvement. Show and tell can be a physical change or a programmatic change in the public realm. Patterns are an idea of the ILF that the ILFI adapted from Christopher Alexander's book, A Pattern Language. The Institute has created the Living Community Patterns as actionable strategies for achieving the petals and imperatives of the Living Community Challenge. While I use the show and tell pattern to illustrate the specific inspiration and education imperative of the beauty petal, patterns are generally very synergistic, satisfying multiple imperatives and providing hyper benefits simultaneously. We started by producing a series of child-centered patterns in a community context. Designing places for our most vulnerable citizens allows us to create places that better serve everyone. The focus on the young has particularly strong benefits for the elderly. Rather than constructing communities around the automobile, we should treat our kids as the highest priority. Doing so will keep them safe and keep us sane. One pattern within this series is the sense of danger, introducing elements of safe danger into our cities. so children learn how to test and master suitable boundaries. This brings us to early pilot city work, which demonstrated to us the power of a simple idea or pattern to communicate complex principles at a variety of scales. You can download both the child-centered patterns and those that were developed for San Francisco online. The living community patterns are meant as action strategies to achieve the imperatives of the Living Community Challenge. This diagram illustrates how patterns may simultaneously achieve multiple imperatives, the orange boxes, under several petals shown as the blue boxes. There are 12 living community patterns summarized in the San Francisco work that Scott's going to dive into. One of which was the second act. When buildings undergo significant retrofits to meet earthquake requirements or update utilities, we believe they should be rebuilt as living buildings. Here's an example of a beneficial reuse of the Kellogg House. Not only reusing the existing project saves on materials, but it significantly reduces the project's embodied carbon footprint as it is incorporated with a new structure. So, the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt Federal Building in Portland is an example of an 18-story office tower. It was completed in 1974, and the building's MEP systems were worn out and outdated. The project goals included upgrading building systems and updating the overall interior. The modernization of this building is predicted to reduce energy use by 60%. This slide represents a good way for projects to demonstrate their energy use success through the use of the Institute's Reveal label, a label that communicates a building's energy performance in clear, useful format, demonstrating the commitment to energy efficiency and transparency. So back to the show and tell pattern. This pattern can manifest itself in a variety of ways to support a living community's physical and programmatic development in the public realm, such as the equity drafting table that the Institute developed. It's an interactive installation that asks the critical question: what will it take to make your community inclusive and robust for all? Through a self-guided tour, attendees engage with thought-provoking questions on topics of equity, privilege, and green building. Parking Day is an annual worldwide event where artists, designers, and citizens transformed metered parking spots into temporary public parks. It's another good example of the show and tell pattern. And pilot installations to help ease the transition from auto-oriented to people-oriented spaces are also a good example of show and tell. This demonstration modeled safety and livability improvements. It turned unusable parking area and an unsafe corner into an area for pedestrians, into an urban outdoor living room. Tactical urbanism, like this underpass of Ottawa's Queensway, was taken over by acoustical guitars and hot pink shag carpets. This is my last example of the show and tell pattern that can help build momentum and progress while demonstrating the vision of the community.
Great.
So,
thank you, Alicia.
Great. I'm going to hand things off to Scott, who's going to talk about the City of San Francisco's use of the living community patterns. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia. That was fantastic. I went through a workshop in the Living Community Challenge a few years ago, and just having this refresh just continued to motivate me. I find it intriguing and engaging every time I get into it. So what I'd like to do now is talk about San Francisco's experience working with the Institute and trying to push the boundary on living communities in San Francisco. We basically developed a set of patterns, which Alicia mentioned already, and we did this as part of a grant program that the Institute was running back in 2012 and 2013. It was a Living City grant program. It was a very rich collaboration, and our purpose and interest in pursuing this was really to see how the Living Building Challenge might scale if we applied it to a community level. And we were addressing at that time different ideas for how to, or the larger challenge of how to really reweave the urban fabric for neighborhood sustainability. And we were hoping that the path-breaking work that the Institute was doing would help us out with that, and which it did. One of the things that particularly intrigued me about the Institute's approach was this idea of ultimate performance imperatives as part of the method used to spur the innovation needed to really generate the performance we need for sustainability and living communities. As we were a little slow in our work, the Institute actually published the Living Community Challenge along the way, and we needed to shift gears a little, and so we focused on this concept of the patterns as tools for implementing the Living Community Challenge, and that's the work that we did. So this report that we prepared, which you can download, describes our experience in detail, and this presentation focuses on a few key points of method and the pattern use. And you can see in the table of contents, we kind of cover a quick little sketch of the vision. We review the Living Community Challenge, as well as the patterns. We go into a description of the patterns and then to case applications of it. So, as sort of coming out of the work we did with the Institute, we ended up with this sort of sketch draft of a vision, possible vision for San Francisco as a living city, and I think the key parameters there are illustrative. It's a city that prospers within the ecological carrying capacity of the city and the larger bioregion, that integrates wild nature into the built environment, that organizes land use to meet daily needs, maybe within a 10-minute radius or so of walking, maybe biking also. Provides fully integrated multimodal transportation system, not just a selection of modes, but a multimodal transportation system that can meet the trip generation of the land use pattern itself in total. Uses only local renewable energy, solar principally. Ensures water security with local supply from capture and reuse. And it designs for deconstruction and the circular economy. It maximizes local organic food production and use, maybe even exclusively. And it cultivates community well-being, advances equity and social justice by design. It radiates beauty in the built environment, and it inspires other communities and regions. So it's a long list, but it's a short list when you dig into all of the detail around these concepts. One of the things that we found emerging from our work with the Institute was that there's some principles behind the approach, which we're calling the method here. And there are just some high-level principles that are helpful to have in mind as one goes forward. And those are, one, which Alicia already mentioned in terms of, if you remember that S graph with the red in the lower right quadrant, or lower left quadrant, and regenerative green in the upper right quadrant, it's really shifting the focus of what we're doing from doing less bad to doing good, to set the ideal as the indicator of success. You know, right up front from the beginning, to know where it is that we need to go in terms of performance. And to break paradigms and create new models, including our mental models, which are often, you know, kind of the first line of constraint that we run into in trying to do this work. Acting as a trim tab for changing course. I'm not sure how many people know what a trim tab is, but it's the little mini rudder on the larger rudder of any large ship, which you need to move initially before you even have an opportunity to change the large rudder that will ultimately change the direction of the ship. So looking for those small but really impactful opportunities to make some change that ultimately result in systems change. And then enhancing local resource use. One of the key points that sort of operating concepts in this approach is carrying capacity and living within the carrying capacity of an area, whether that's the city or the bioregion or the whole planet. And this is an old concept that's part of any ecological approach to planning. But the key point here, and the key point of hope and sort of opportunity that a living future method offers us, is the idea of enhancing carrying capacity. So carrying capacity is not a fixed absolute limit. It's a malleable limit. And it depends on how productive we can be, how net positive we can be, both in the natural world as well as in the human economy. And you can see here that the challenge of regenerative system design is really shifting from our existing kind of linear throughput systems where waste exists by design, by our design of the system, versus regenerative circular systems where waste is designed out as resources for other processes. And as simple as that is, that's a big thing to do, but that's where we need to go. That's what this approach allows us to do. And where we end up with this is really the concept of renewing San Francisco or any city, any community, as a regenerative system. In San Francisco, we're pretty much built out. We're not going to be creating a lot of new neighborhoods. So we need to find a model to gradually transform existing neighborhoods and infrastructure systems. And like living organisms, cities can regenerate over time to be models of ecologically sustainable urbanism. And they do that by integrating the performance imperatives of regenerative life support systems into the city metabolism and the built environment. And it's important to understand that with this metaphor we're using about living organisms and regeneration, et cetera, nature and living systems are self-organizing automatically. Nobody tells them what to do, they just do it. Human systems are not quite that way. So we need to add some intelligence on top of the principles of living systems and bake those in intentionally into our plan, build, design, invest decision processes and institutions. And that's really the challenge of renewing San Francisco and other cities as a regenerative system. So I want to talk for a bit about the patterns. Alicia mentioned already that they're synergistic. One pattern achieves multiple goals, which is a key principle of living systems and a living systems approach. They're a living language. They'll develop with use both internally to the pattern itself as well as multiplying. The 12 patterns that we arrived at in this work that we did was just an initial set. There's something like 300 or 400 patterns that Christopher Alexander has. So the sky's the limit there. But in terms of using these patterns, it's important to use a few of the key patterns that are most suited to a particular project. We don't need to use them all, and they're really a starting point for innovation. They catalyze creativity, and we'll see that as we go forward here. Alicia mentioned this, that the patterns are action design strategies, and if you take the concepts of the petals, the imperatives, and the patterns, and inform the project design, you get a project that really achieves living systems performance. So we saw this slide earlier, but I think it's important just to quickly go through some of the key patterns here. So we've got urban rewilding. We've got human scale communities. We've got streets for people, blue-green streets, streets to table, grower maker spaces, roof as a resource, mobility in the middle, second act, place-based memory, show and tell, and footprint analysis. And these phrases and concepts, likely most of them sound familiar in terms of our planning work and background, but if you dive into them a little, you'll find that even the familiar ones have a kind of a different flavor to them that lead to different outcomes than just applied maybe by themselves outside of a living design concept. And in particular, the urban rewilding goes to integrating wild nature into communities. The blue-green street goes to transforming some streets into new places of biophilia, recreation, and natural systems, again, multifunction. And then the footprint analysis, pattern 12, is a little different type of pattern because it's really an analytic tool. And that goes to establishing the baseline carrying capacity for a neighborhood or a city by assessing its potential resource capture. And that sets up the starting point for the innovation and creativity. The report itself goes through and describes each of these patterns in more detail. One-page description, which could become a lot more involved, and a second page which provides some examples of where that pattern and those concepts have already been used in other projects around the world. Blue-green streets, roof as a resource. San Francisco just recently passed a Better Roofs Ordinance, which talks about green roofs as well as the use of solar, and maybe we can even expand that over time. And then we were fortunate to be able to do 2 test cases, 2 half-day charrettes, one in Noe Valley and one in Chinatown. And I'm going to talk about the Noe Valley one here, which was in the Ames Alley area, which is a 2-block alley between 21st and 23rd, just west of Guerrero, and it's near Dolores Park. Basically, we came down and met with an existing community group, neighborhood group that had been interested in doing something with the alleys for a while now, along with other projects that they're pursuing. And we met with them, did a walking tour, and you can see this one part of the alley here that triggered this idea of the place-based memory, with a lot of kind of rotating additions to this wall as it goes along. And then we gathered back in one of the neighbors' studios, which was really fortunate and wonderful, and basically kind of debriefed on the patterns and talked about selecting a couple that seemed to work. And although we were really focused on the alley itself, the 2 blocks of the alley itself, the exercise really expanded. The use of the patterns really illuminated other opportunities to create value, and that expanded the study area really to these 5 blocks instead of just the interior alley there. And you can see some of the patterns that were in use: the street to table, grower maker spaces, blue-green streets was a big one, the show and tell piece, like that. So this is just an example of how the patterns unleashed a lot of creativity that would not have probably occurred otherwise, and did so in a relatively short period of time. I mean, we spent about 3 or 4 hours in total, getting organized, getting settled, doing a tour, etc. And this is a little sketch of what that might look like. And so, by way of conclusion, I would just like to say that the Living Community Challenge and the Living Community Patterns are really a new way of thinking about the end game of sustainability. Oftentimes we get really focused on, what's the next step that we can do, what's possible in this little moment, without really looking at and informing that moment from a concept of what the end game is. Where do we actually need to go and be? So it's really a beginning, a work in progress. It's not an end right now, but it's a way to get to the end that we need. It involves renewing citywide and neighborhood planning from a generative, ecological, and design-focused perspective. It really represents this new emerging paradigm of regenerative urbanism, and it's reflected in the Living Community Challenge and patterns themselves. In terms of the method, a few key takeaway points is to reveal the system design parameters with the carrying capacity analysis, to set goals that really reflect the needed ultimate systems performance as a spur to innovation and as a compass, and innovate and invent to achieve those goals, that systems performance we need, and to expand the carrying capacity, which is a key aspect of the challenge ahead. And obviously to take the biggest step possible at the moment and to apply the patterns at any scale. And I just love this picture, and so I got a little corny here, and I'm going to end this with, from the Living Patterns and the Living Community Challenge, we come out of the fog of sustainability, which is often a little murky sometimes, and into the light of a renewed and regenerative San Francisco with these Living Community Patterns and Living Community Challenge. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Alicia to bring us home, and then we'll get to some questions and answers. Alicia?
Great. Thanks, Scott. So we'd like to just touch on a few resources for the Living Community Challenge. You can download our program materials, the 1.1 standard, as well as the handbook from our webpage. They're both free. The standard has more information about requirements of the individual imperatives, and the handbook answers questions about the process, as well as clarifying and providing some exceptions for those imperatives. You can visit the Living Community Challenge at living-future.org/LCC, where you'll find more tools and resources, as well as those last two documents. We also, at the Institute, have a network of ambassador volunteers that are spreading the word about living buildings and the Living Community Challenge. If you're interested in joining this network, you can find more information on the Institute's webpage as well. And we're quite active as our communications group and social media. If you'd like more information, you can join LinkedIn groups. Look for a collaborative near you in cities all over the world. We get information out by Twitter and Flickr. And of course, you can contact us either at the webpage or our lcc.support email address. We have an annual conference next year. It's in Seattle, May 17 through 19. Encourage everyone to continue the conversation about Living Community Challenge and Living Building Challenge and our Living Product Challenge. I would love to see you all in Seattle next May. And we would love to talk to you more and answer your questions now as we slide into this next section about any questions you might have on Scott's presentation or the Living Community Challenge items that I presented. We have a few minutes left and we can dive into those questions. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share the Living Community Challenge with you today.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. So I do have some contact information up here in case you think of a question later and you want to send it or whatnot. But we do have a few questions we'd like to get to. For Alicia, someone made a comment that many of the slides seem to point toward the idea that more nature in cities is a key aspect of the system that you described. And another approach, this comment said, is to increase density within cities so that natural areas outside of cities can stay as untouched as possible. And I was just wondering if you could touch on whether there are any, if you discuss density in cities as part of your program, or if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yes, so we need both. We need more density in cities and we need more nature in cities. And I think a key component to that you saw in a lot of the renderings is this transition we're going through in our transportation system. We have a whole session in our webinar series about human-powered mobility, imperative number 4, and we're moving to this where it's already in use in areas like Europe, these micro-mobilities. Our transportation choices are going to be the size of them will be shrinking in many ways. And I think we're all aware of the change in our transportation system. You can't really read a paper without hearing about autonomous vehicles, regardless of what you think of those. Our transportation infrastructure is going to be changing. So as we get to some smaller scale and the streets then have public transit on them, this micro mobility, it's going to provide us in some boulevard type areas more space in which we can have co-benefits of systems. We can have more vegetation, which will help us with our stormwater goals, our agriculture goals, and that natural element that there's a lot of science out there and research that says that, for our cognitive and mental function and our physical health as well, we need access to those green places. So we think that density as well as nature is integral to living communities.
Great, thanks. Another question for you regarding transportation. How do you measure energy use of transportation as part of your program?
So as part of our program, the net positive energy imperative is essentially looking at, it's measured by metered data. So that's street lights, electrified public transportation, car charging, things that are going to be on a meter, building energy, obviously those utility bills, within parks and sites, street lights, and all of that energy. So if it's, that's the way that the net positive energy imperative is set up. Transportation, you can measure that energy. There are several reporting protocols that cities are using for their greenhouse gas collection, but we actually aren't. While I mentioned that transportation and energy consumption, we have a chance to influence it with the living community strategies and reduce that transportation energy consumption. The main place that the challenge intersects transportation is really in that last imperative, human-powered living, under the place pedal. And it addresses mostly infrastructure, not necessarily measuring the energy use of transportation. So it points to things of having public transportation, support for car charging, and depending on your density, it talks also about the diversity of uses. And that's all covered within the LCC version 1.1 standard if you'd like to download it and take a look at those requirements.
Okay, thanks. Within the challenge, is there guidance for how to achieve targets and standards that you are putting forth as ideal? That's
a good question. So an integral part of the Living Community Challenge, or any of our challenges, how you get to that high performance is up to you, and it assumes that you're using best practices that are out there. It needs to be regionally, contextually appropriate, so there's going to be a variety of different solutions. So we don't mandate how to get there, but through our education, our conferences, when we're out speaking with teams, we do share those lessons learned and have a body of case studies on our website of how people are achieving these, but we don't mandate how one would do that.
But Alicia, this is Scott, but you guys actually support teams with consulting and resources, et cetera, as teams engage in doing the Living Community Challenge. Is that true?
That is correct. So design team members may bring us on for visioning and support, and we do consulting, and we do have a robust education arm as well. And so we are working actively with teams to come with solutions.
Great. We've got a couple more questions. I think we can fit them in before 4. One is, could small community biodigesters be part of LCC?
Could small community biodigesters? So biodigesters are a form of combustion, and thank you for noticing this question comes from because I noted our net positive energy is without combustion. It's actually an issue that a question we receive seems like recently more. We're looking at it, but no, biodigesters currently cannot be part of the Living Community Challenge. And the reason from that is because when you look at one of the ways we look at things are if everyone or if a certain strategy was to be deployed everywhere. We get this question about nuclear energy as well. The resulting negative impact from it, we wouldn't want that to be replicated everywhere. I think there's a large body of work that can be done in this area and research to maybe look at some small scale applicability of it, but currently we haven't seen that research to sway our opinion on that.
Okay. The last question I see is kind of related to your last statement, I guess. Do you have any sort of literature review available that's sort of to back up the philosophy or approach of the LCC?
Literature review. I think the closest we have, and I didn't cite all of it, but for each one of these strategies, such as biophilia, in pointing to Richard Liv's work, there are numerous organizations who are working very deeply on many of these individual pieces, and whenever possible, we do cite those in our education and documentation. So if you look throughout the standard and the handbook, you'll find some more of those references.
Alicia, this is Scott. Do you still have, I remember a couple years ago when I looked into getting certified through you, that you part of your program for certification is just self-education, and you had a whole list of a bibliography that people could pick and choose books from, et cetera, and that would kind of support the philosophical grounding a little more generally anyway. Is that still available on your website?
Yes, it is. I think that's a good, we like to connect people with others who are working in the field and doing good work. So our Living Future accreditation, if you go to that area onto our webpage, we'll have that reading list, as well as on our webpage. If you look under research, we have a variety of white papers on things like water policy and, individual aspects of the challenge. So we do have that reading list for the LFA program, as well as research and case studies.
Great.
Great. That sounds like a great resource. Well, thank you again to both of you for speaking. I want to remind everyone that this webinar was eligible for 1 credit for CM and for the Green Business Accreditation, GBCI. So do make sure you log those. We will also have this webinar available as a video and as a PDF on our website, sustainableplanning.net, within the next few days. So keep an eye out for that. So thank you, everyone, for participating. Hope to see you on our next webinar.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.